Hi, I'm Morten Solvik, Vice President of Mahler Foundation and host and producer of the Mahler Hour, where we bring you the personalities, places, and projects happening right now in the Mahler community around the world. Last month, our broadcast came live from the Portillo Festival in the stunning Andean mountains of Chile. My guests were Alejandro Urrutia, Patricio Sabate, members of the American String Quartet, and some of the students of the Portillo Academy. We discussed the special atmosphere of learning and collaboration there, the chamber music training, and the orchestral preparations for their stunning performance of Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde. Remember, you can see this show and all past Mahler hours on our website. During this episode of the Mahler Hour, we'll be taking up the alluring and perhaps controversial subject of arranging Mahler. As our composer increasingly becomes a staple of the musical present, there is a growing demand for making his scores available to a wider audience. While major orchestras can carry the logistical and financial burden of such an undertaking, what opportunities might exist for smaller ensembles to present these magnificent but expansive works in concert? What means are available to a chamber ensemble, for instance? What does a Mahler symphony for 25 or even 7 instrumentalists sound like? And is it even a legitimate undertaking? Before we begin, let me remind everyone attending live to post any questions you might have to the comments section. We will get to these at the end of our show. Don't forget to include your name or at least the city and country you are writing from. Also, the Mahler Hour is brought to you by Mahler Foundation. So if you want to support our activities, please become a member. Just go to our website at mahlerfoundation.org for all of the details. Let's jump right into arranging Mahler. Here to help me sort out some of these questions are 2 musicians who have explored this terrain thoroughly. John Warner, founder and artistic director of Orchestra for the Earth, and Benjamin Garcia, research associate at the Bibliothèque Musicale de Grange-Fleury and composer, conductor, and artistic director of the Mahlerian Camerata. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Morten. Hi, everyone.
Nice to be here.
Nice to be here.
You are, among other things, both conductors. Tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and the organizations you run.
John, you start?
Yeah.
I shall start. Okay. So I set up Orchestra for the Earth about 5 or 6 years ago. The idea being to use music as a way of engaging people with the natural world and climate change and associated issues. And Mahler has been very much at the center of what we do because of the depth of connection between his music and nature and the power his music has to inspire people in that regard.
So it's an orchestra, but what's the normal size of the orchestra?
It varies, really. I mean, I guess normal is about 20 to 25 chamber orchestra. We've done stuff with bigger, and we've done stuff with a lot smaller as well, depending on the project. Yeah.
And you're based in the UK?
We're based in the UK.
Benjamin?
Yes, I founded the Mahlerian Camerata in 2018, and it's also a chamber orchestra, which has for purpose to be able to play Mahler in some different concert house, so we can grow up into the maximum forces, asking by Mahler, of course, but we also can play a very few musicians. But my favorite size is around 30 musicians, because it allows us to go in the same time in great opera houses and concert halls, and in small and unknown locations.
So you've both told me about your organizations, but I did ask you a little bit about your backgrounds too. So I'm going to ask you, John, and then Benjamin, to tell us how you got to become the founder of an orchestra and a conductor to begin with.
Well, I guess I founded an orchestra mostly because orchestras don't tend to come to you when you're my age, so I needed to make my own. And why did I want to become a conductor? I don't know. It's one of those things I don't really remember not wanting to be a conductor. Yeah. So I guess I'm what you call a freelancer. So I do lots of other bits and pieces around my work with my own orchestra.
And Benjamin?
For me, it was a choice. I was already assistant of François-Xavier Roth, and I was following him around some projects, very interesting projects. but something was missing for me, because when I was 15 years old, I had this big shocking moment when I hear for the first time Gustav Mahler music. And then it was like a purpose in my life to get closer to this man, to his music, and to his legacy, of course, because when we speak about Mahler, we speak, of course, about his music, but also his legacy. And then I needed a tool to bring it to other people, maybe people who never heard one note of Mahler music.
Mm-hmm. So it's, young conductors often aspire to conduct Mahler, to perform Mahler. But of course, it's the problem you're faced with is how do you get from I want to do this to this is how I'm going to do it? And in a sense, you've both sort of answered the question almost. I mean, tell me about your first venture in reducing Mahler to the forces at your disposal. What prompted it? Benjamin, you say you've been inspired by Mahler. In fact, that's probably why you went into it. And John, you said you have a close association there, but it's a bit of a daunting task. What prompted sort of the first attempts at doing this?
I think for myself, it was just the occasion. It was for a concert to the Chorégie d'Orange, which is a big festival in south of France. And I think the first of all, you need a team. You need some people around you believing as yourself as it is important to make this transformation around Mahler music. Because when I started, I heard here and there that it was a bad idea, that who could possibly being like a rival to Gustav Mahler in orchestration way. So, but it is very, very important to me to make understand to the audience and to other musicians maybe who are thinking that it's not at all an unrespectable gesture, of course. It's just the opposite. It's about bring this music and make it some access to other people. And I think it was the philosophy of Mahler about his music. It doesn't have to be taken in a stage in some big concert halls and for a few people who already know this music. I just wanted to hear it again and again. Mahler music is like a medication in our sick world, and we have to be okay to give it to the most of we can. And actually, I think the gesture of reducing these huge forces, orchestral forces, start to the good choice about the pieces you want to read, to transcript. Because, of course, as a young conductor and a young orchestra, if we would have begun with the 8th symphony, it would have been make people laugh, about us. But started with the 7th, and it was for me the possibility to show how much Mahler orchestration is also about chamber music in different way. But
we'll get to that, and we'll get to that in a moment, Benjamin. Because before we concentrate on what happened, I'd like to know also about the public's reaction. John, what prompted you to do it the first time, and what was the reception of this venture?
I think, to be honest, for me, it was partly necessity. It was the first tour I organized to Austria, to the composing huts, and mostly these places just don't have spaces big enough for a full symphony orchestra, and I certainly didn't have a budget big enough for one either. But I'd performed a couple of chamber arrangements before, and naming no names, they definitely inspired me to do my own, perhaps to do it better. I saw advantages in it, but I also saw some major disadvantages in the way they've been done, and I thought I could have a go at it.
What the public think?
I think it went down pretty well. I think especially given, when these arrangements are not designed to be played in the same spaces as the symphony orchestra versions, and so they're usually performed in front of audiences who don't hear them very often. And I think that's really at the core of it, that it's bringing the music to places that it wouldn't otherwise be reached, and that makes it.
And what was your first production? What was your first experiment in this, or your first go at it?
Number 4, I think. Yeah.
Number 4. Okay. So let's jump in. We have some recordings here of your arrangements, respectively. And Benjamin, I want to begin with you. You mentioned the 7th Symphony. I think starting off with 7 is biting off a lot to chew. But you've done this, and we have a very nice recording of this. Before we get into listening to the segment from the first movement, how many musicians are we listening to here?
In this version, there are 27 musicians reported in a very specific way. I mean, the string section is counting 12 parts, which are all separate parts. We have 5 violins, for example, and all the 5 violins have a totally different part to their neighbors. And after that, we have 1 for each woodwind, 2 French horns, 1 trumpet, 1 trombone, 1 tenor horn, 1 tuba, 2 percussions, and 1 harp.
Let's have a listen. This is from the first movement, the very opening. For me, what's fascinating is how much of this sonic landscape is still there. I mean, it's still suggestive. There are far fewer instruments, but of course, one thing you couldn't compromise on, and you mentioned it just now, was the tenor horn. It's such a signature device, especially in this opening movement. But with everything else that's operating in the background, you don't have the massiveness of scale anymore. You have to be very decisive about what you chose. What guided some of that decision making?
I think for me the most important is to keep the different sounds, and you can reduce the size of the orchestra, and it won't be very, very shocking for the audience if you can remain with the what sounds comes to the very moment the audience is waiting for it, and in this way, that's why I kept the whole spectre of the instrumentarium, and actually there is something very, very helpful in this very transcription also is the use of the brass section. Mahler already wrote very, very difficult and heavy parts for brass section, of course, but there is something new in the 21st century, that all the family of the mutes, the different mutes for the brass section. And for me, it's very, very important because it's like a new family of instruments. And you can make a trumpet play softer as a flute, for example. And you can manage to recreate the sounds that you hear when you hear the whole forces.
Yeah. So by the brain recognizing those moments, you can get away with other things perhaps not being as precise. And an important aspect too is that you've doubled some of your instruments. The flute and piccolo is the same player, I believe, right? And the oboe,
yes,
the English
exactly,
horn,
exactly,
and the clarinet and the bassoon, and then maintaining a very large 3 horns, a trumpet, a trombone, a tenor horn, and a tuba for your brass, which is such an important aspect of this.
exactly.
Let's go to something with more texture, a little thicker. Let's go to the third movement now for our next segment. So what's remarkable, and I checked this, is that the scoring is not that divergent from the original here. And you mentioned this earlier, that while Mahler's orchestra is large, he often deploys it with a very select choice of instruments, which is another thing that you can, of course, make use of here.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I'm laughing because I didn't remember that we play it so fast.
Well, the orchestra probably remembers.
Yes, especially the violins.
All right. Here's another passage from the fourth movement, the second night music, that presents a classic problem for the arranger. Let's see if you can hear it to the audience here. What I love about this is, of course, you've had to compromise and find similar sonorities. And for our acute listeners, you will all recognize it. What do you do if you don't have a mandolin, right? You give it to the harp, which, of course, makes you wonder. Of course, there is a sonic difference. We all hear it, right? But would we have heard it if he had scored it for harp? I mean, this is, of course, a completely theoretical question, and it makes you wonder why he did put the mandolin in there, doesn't it?
Of course. So as John said it before, sometimes you have to as an artistic director and of the ensemble, you have to take some decision because of money. And that's also the purpose of the I think of this philosophy to bring Mahler everywhere. You have to make it possible, so you don't have to bring too much people. So, and the funny part is that it's not also the harp playing the mandolin parts, is the violins and the violas with the credit cards.
With a credit card.
Yes, we found it during the rehearsals, because I was sure the best choice was the mediator, like for the guitar.
Right.
And during one of the violin player, she told me, let's try something with the credit card, and it was much better. So that's the tips.
Now we've revealed one of your secrets. I suppose it's in the score now. Play pluck with credit card. Is that what it says?
No, I kept mediator.
Mediator. Okay. So it's now, but now your secret will remain with us, I guess.
Can I reveal a secret about that movement as well?
Yeah, you know everything.
Well, because I didn't arrange the whole symphony, but I arranged just that movement once for a concert I did at Morton's Festival. And I learned from a friend that the fingering on a mandolin is the same as it is on a violin. So I just gave a mandolin to one of the violinists and said, go home and get to know this instrument.
Oh,
and so
no
for that
kidding.
movement, they switched instrument, and yeah, they just had to learn to do the tremolo thing on a mandolin, which is quite difficult.
Right.
But, yeah.
There you
That's
go.
another way.
And I think a banjo is the same as a viola as well, but that's unfortunately not so useful.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Some tricks from the toolkit here. That's fascinating. All right, let's just hear one little clip from the finale to close off the seventh here. Benjamin, did you feel that you were getting enough of the breadth at that point, or were you missing? Did you feel like there was something missing there at the end? Or, I mean, you can only do so much with 27.
I think it's not just about how loud you play, or you ask players to play. I think if I miss something, is energy. But I think I remember that everyone gave me the whole energy they got yet, and I did the same for them, I hope. Mm-hmm. So as we said before, when you play this kind of transcription, often you play it in smaller concert halls or smaller location, so the audience is closer. So what they feel is completely different in Berlin Philharmonic or Paris Philharmonic or whatever, because they are closer, and it's like if the music, you know, it's like you have this source of light, and when you do a transcription, you just move the light, and sometimes maybe there is something missing, but you hear something you didn't before. So it's like, you know, the communicated a lot like this.
Yeah, that's right. Some compromise and gain at the same time.
Exactly.
Very good. John, let's take a look and listen to an even more radical reduction. And this is your arrangement of the Second Symphony. I think we'll just play the first clip and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing here. Well, that is a radical reduction, isn't it? John, what are we listening to here? Who's performing?
It's the first movement of the Second Symphony, with 7 players. I was inspired by someone else's use of this ensemble. I mean, it's kind of the Schoenberg ensemble almost. It's almost a Piero ensemble, and I just something about, I don't know, Benjamin finds this with these arrangements, but I find that the ensemble I need comes into my head quite quickly. Something about the piece, the impression I have of the movement, and I just felt that these are the instruments I needed, and I could do without anything else really.
So we're talking about basically a string quartet, piano, flute, and clarinet.
Yeah.
And of course, by doing this, you reduce the colors available to you, right? Not just the volume of sound, which we've already discussed, but the number of colors available to you.
That's it.
How do you get around that, or how do you try to solve those questions?
It's the biggest challenge because, instrumental colors have a huge amount of meaning for Mahler, particularly the instruments that are missing from this ensemble, the horn and the oboe, I'd say especially, have a very unique and quite irreplaceable meaning. But I felt that in this movement, actually, you could manage without. And actually, on this tour, we did do another concert with the Einsam im Herbst from the Song of the Earth, and we also did the Mitternachtslied from the Third Symphony. And for that, I brought in an oboe because you simply couldn't play those pieces without that sonority. Of course, a clarinet practically could play those solos with no issue, but they don't mean the same thing.
No.
But I felt with this that these instruments gave me everything I needed. I mean, there's obviously no brass, but in an ensemble of that size, if you have a piano playing and you have the strings double stopping, you get the impact of brass instruments for the scale of the thing. That's what it's all about. It's all about scale.
Right. And in fact, in sort of miniaturizing this, that you end up with an even more delicate balance between types of sonorities and dynamic markings. You do something very interesting with this sparseness just at the spot where we stopped. Here, the woodwinds, the flutes, oboes, and clarinets in the Mahler are all playing, and yet you assign this passage to solo flute. and it's not joined by the clarinet until a few bars later. Let's have a listen here to what you've done.
Yeah.
Very subtle.
It's a matter of I found it's like what I enjoy about doing these arrangements is the discipline of it, because obviously you can, like you say, if you look at the score there, you think, well, it's written for flute and clarinet, so I should just use flute and clarinet, no arranging necessary. But it's totally different, and if you did that, you'd use basically all the instruments the whole time, and therefore you wouldn't get what Mahler is so good at, which is graded dynamics. Like Benjamin said, it's not about how loud you play, it's also about how loud you orchestrate for. And Mahler obviously had the luxury of being able to say, well, I'll have 4 flutes here rather than 1, etc. So you had to be extremely disciplined about that. For example, also, I mean, I arranged the first symphony, the whole symphony, for this ensemble plus oboe and horn. And for things like quiet horn pedal points, where the horn's just playing a long note, I very rarely use the horn for that. I would use something like a low flute, because in a way they've got similar temperaments as instruments. The flute, when it gets lower, it gets quite soft like a horn. When it gets higher, it gets brighter. And so for that size of ensemble, the flute's perfect for that. So you don't actually want to use the original instrument, because it has a different relationship to the size of ensemble.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Let's hear the rest of this recording. This is directed by the marvelous Frank Scheffer.
Yeah, I must.
Just-
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that it reminds me, the hardest thing with that ensemble is dealing with the piano. And it's not just because it's a new instrument that Mahler wasn't using, but it's just the function, the role of it in the ensemble is very hard to pin down. Partly because the piano is not a sustaining instrument. So once you press the note, you wave goodbye to it. And I have a particular aversion to solving that problem by just doing tremolos, because to me, it just sounds like a balalaika or something. It just doesn't fit the color of the thing. So you got to, but also if you put down a loud bass note, particularly with a 9-foot Steinway, like in that video, there's nothing you can do. It's going to be there for a long time. It can be very disruptive. So managing the weight of the piano sound to the rest of the ensemble, and also, in a way, the piano can be your cheat. It can be your solve all. Because if you can't do something, well, you stick in the piano part. But if you do that, you lose a sense of kind of integrity for the thing. So I really wanted to try and forge a piano part that functioned a bit like a Brahms piano part does in a piece of Brahms chamber music. For example, it has a real role as an instrument rather than just being the chameleon that fills in the gaps.
Yeah. Well, it's a compelling combination of sounds, and as you say, by putting a brand new one in there, it changes the game, and it comes with its very distinctive possibilities. But as you say, it was sort of a warning sign. You just can't throw it in whenever you need it. Just a reminder, if you are with us live, feel free to send us questions through the chat. We'll be happy to answer at the end of the hour. And by the way, these don't have to be questions. If you want to say, hey, this is like the seventh, like the second, whatever, or whatever, comment on maybe other arrangements you've heard, whatever you want to add to the discussion, we'd be very happy to hear from you at the end of our show. Okay, well, we've hit upon now the next major question, and that is process. We've talked about the issues, we've heard some of the results now of the process, but how do you actually reduce a Mammoth score? We've heard why you do it, for practical reasons, financial reasons. But going about doing this, of course, there must be probably the hidden fear that people are going to accuse you of hubris, that you're taking over Mahler's score, who was so particular about his instrumentation, and exposing yourself to that kind of criticism. What do you think you achieve? What is the net gain here? What does a good arrangement achieve?
I think maybe the arrangements are like Mahler's symphony during his own life, never finished, never achieved. You have maybe always a new reason to add it something, or to retire something, or to consider it to do it for a totally other ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
And if I just can react to what we said just before, I think maybe in the subject about the for example, the piano place in the ensemble with John, I think maybe sometime I'm thinking to add on the separate parts for each musician when they play something they wouldn't in the original version. For example, maybe a trumpet with a mute playing instead of the English horn, to stipulate for the musician which part he is doing the role at this moment. And some add like this, maybe we could do it our whole life. And about the criticisms, if somebody doesn't understand, I can understand that, but we have to remind that music has always been provided by transcriptions, and its natural form is to bring the substance of something and to bring it. And I think John is just like us for in this very topic, that we don't want to replace the original version. Of course not. We want to bring people who doesn't know it yet to run to discover it. That's the point.
And then to go maybe to the original from there, perhaps. John, what does a good arrangement achieve for you?
Yeah, I think it's just that, really. I mean, it's also great for the musicians, and for me certainly, as a conductor, to be able to have physical contact with the music, particularly the arrangements with the piano in, is great. And I think it, yeah, I would love to do a performance of that first movement of the Second Symphony with those musicians in principal seats. Now we've played it like that together, because the contact and the is so much more enhanced, the understanding of the music. I think it really is very beneficial for the musicians.
Yeah, of course, if you're sitting there in the violin section, you don't feel responsible for the downbeat in the same way as when you're exposed in that fashion.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's tough. I would also say that I agree. I've also been tempted, as Benjamin said, to put in little notations as to what the instruments are imitating at any one time. But if anything, I see myself as having succeeded if that is no longer relevant. If this is now just a really nice flute solo or a really nice cello solo or so on, and they can just play their instrument as their instrument to the best of their ability, rather than feeling like they're imitating anything. I mean, it's perhaps a false summit, but I think that's something to strive for.
Yeah, and it's important, as you've all been pointing out, when someone may accuse you of not using the right instrument at the right point in time, that in a way you're reinventing from the bottom up what this sound construct should try to do in a way. No one has said this yet, but maybe you have indirectly, but you're trying to create the experience of that piece transported perhaps to almost another medium, right? And to bring a convincing performance of the work on those merits, on the merits of what it originally is. And it seems that you both feel that Mahler can withstand the transformation. That it's hard to keep his music in a box.
I think that's it. I think it's a surprising similarity between Mahler and Bach. Actually, Bach sort of famously indestructible. You know, I've heard very moving performances of Bach on quite absurd instruments. Sometimes it's just somehow you can't get the humanity out of it. And I think with Mahler it's similar. And actually, to put it on a more specific reason, I think it's because of the counterpoint. It's because Mahler, there's always more than one thing going on. It's not like when I did that arrangement we just heard, I also did Don Juan by Strauss, and that was so much more difficult. And that's because Strauss fills out the textures with all sorts of, and filler is a potentially pejorative word, but it's not, it's a style. But Mahler doesn't do that. Everything is essential. So a bit like a Bach fugue, you just have voices which all have characters and purposes, and you just need to assign them to the right instrument, and the music remains the same.
Very interesting observation. I've heard reductions of Mahler where I come out of it hearing so much more of the counterpoint than I had appreciated in the full version, because they were, so intermixed with other sonorities. But obviously, it's audible in reductions, much more so. In fact, that's a win, if you will.
Definitely.
All right, we're gonna turn to the Rückert-Lieder, and because both of you have also arranged some of these, Benjamin, you have a version for orchestra of Ich bin der Welt abhanden gekommen. Let's hear the opening 2 minutes. That's with Vanina Santoni, soprano, your lovely wife, and fewer instruments than we heard in the Seventh Symphony. Here it's flute, English horn, clarinet, bassoon, 2 horns, trombone, and 12 string instruments. Correct?
Yes, exactly. With the harp also.
With the harp,
and which
also
is very, very important is that the trombone part is very important in the sequence we just heard, because it replaces the second bassoon with a mute, of course. And I think that's a very interesting point when you do transcript Mahler symphony or Lieder, is that people would already know that don't have to be, moved in the bad way. They just have to take the music and to appreciate it or love it in this. However, if people doesn't know yet this music, doesn't have to hear there is a trick, something. There is something not written by Mahler himself.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things here. For one, this is a piano song that has been orchestrated. And are you looking at other examples of orchestrations, like what Mahler was trying to achieve here?
Sorry, Martin, I didn't hear you very well.
What did you this orchestration, what is it taken from? What do you use as your point of departure?
I use the soprano version of the Mahler way.
Right. Yeah. So I don't have that score in front of me. I suppose there isn't a lot of difference, is there? I mean, of course, there's a bigger string section, but what else is Mahler adding that somehow we could be missing here?
Actually, it was pretty simple and pretty easy to transcript it, because there are not that much differences. The original orchestra is pretty small, and I do have just behind me the facsimile of this very Rückert Lied. And for example, there is one page with Alma written the first orchestration, I think, and it was 6 first violins, 6 second violins, and 2 less by a section. So it's not a huge orchestra, and that's interesting, because now when often when we play the Rückert Lieder, maybe before the 5th symphony, the same concert, we almost keep the same size of the orchestra, and especially the string, the string section. And for me, it's a big mistake, because it's almost chamber music already. And in what you just hear, the very difference is the trombone part, only the trombone part. Yeah,
right. All right, let's go to our next Rückert Lied. John, you have a version of yet another, and this is the Rückert Lied Liebste Schönheit. Let's have a listen, and then we can talk about how this was put together. Well, maybe we should talk about how it's put together first, and while we get our audio aligned. The orchestration here, of course, is a challenge. This is a piano song, a lead that Mahler wrote for Alma. What was your arrangement here? This is really a matter of adding instruments, right? In this case.
Yeah, I mean, someone called Max Puttmann did orchestrate it for the original publication. So there is a decent enough orchestration out there, which I definitely used for reference. But also, I don't think Mahler ever really wrote a true piano piece. I don't think he could help but intuit what instruments would play each line. So there's so much kind of latent instrumentation in the music itself anyway. That side of things I didn't find very difficult, to be honest. And it's such a sort of sweet gem of a song that for a small ensemble, I think it was just eight players that I did it for this time. I felt it suited it, and there's no balance issues with the singer, and there's something about also the sort of string quartet sound, which I think is quite nice to hear as well.
Right.
because they play kind of like a Brahms Schumann quartet in the way I wrote it, which is somehow I think suits the sound world. It's quite Viennese.
Yeah. If we do get to hear this and see it, it will be flute, oboe, clarinet, horn, and string quartet, I believe. Are we ready with that?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's Gabriella Noble there, soprano. It's it's hard not to be moved by the performance, and of course I was literally in the audience that day.
It's a nice song.
Yeah, it's not any. There's one more instrument we haven't talked about here, and that's the voice. Of course, I mean you're arranging now, and you maybe looking at the Mahler orchestrations, and in this case, Mahler never orchestrated this song. It seems we're looking at someone else's. So there's sort of an easy connectivity to the reduced forces that were called for in the orchestrated version. But it would seem to me that if you're reducing that even further, the voice has an even more prominent position in the balance. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it also means that, I mean, I probably wouldn't do that arrangement with Birgit Nilsson singing. You kind of match the voice to the ensemble. But there are little things as well that often, well, I've just finished an arrangement actually of the Berg 7 early songs, and you notice in that very frequently he, in the orchestration, adds a doubling for the voice, a trumpet or an oboe or something. Right. In a chamber ensemble, that's not really appropriate. It doesn't really work. It doesn't add the color in the subtle way it does with an orchestra. So you can let the voice sit on its own much more naturally, I think.
Right.
And the singer can be more subtle. They can sing it like Lieder rather than orchestral song.
Right. Right. Definitely an advantage. All right. Before we conclude and go to the audience questions, and there are a lot that have been coming in here, it needs to be said that your work in arranging Mahler doesn't end with what we've heard today. I'm going to start with you, John. What other compositions have you reimagined from Mahler's oeuvre? We've heard your Second Symphony, and we've heard here the song. Just a quick list over what other symphonies in particular you've worked on.
So I've done a fourth for a chamber ensemble of about 22 players. I've done the Einsam ein Herbst. I've done that twice actually, for a chamber orchestra and for an octet. I've done a couple of the Rückert-Lieder. I've done a lot of Wunderhorn songs for 6 musicians, which we use on our tours in Austria, basically because we can do a kind of pop-up concert of them. For example, we played them in a hut in Toblach, for a children's concert. So they suddenly become extremely portable and light. Yeah, I think that's it. And I'm just I'm just working on another one, but I'll tell you about that another time.
I think you
the first symphony. Did I mention that?
The first symphony you mentioned earlier today,
Yeah.
but you haven't mentioned the 9th.
Oh yeah, and that one. Yeah, first one. That was ages ago. Yeah. Yeah,
Well.
the arrogance of youth. That one.
I think it came off quite well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was great fun. That one, it does actually, the piece lends itself to the intimacy of it. Is beautiful.
Yeah, which is hard to believe at first, but you have to experience it. Benjamin, what other works have you done? We've heard the 7th and one of the Rückert-Lieder.
Actually, I did the full cycle of the Rückert-Lieder and some Wunderhorn Lieder also for the same size of the orchestra, so around 27. And I also did the 4th symphony, but for 16 instruments with piano this time, which was for the concert in Salle Cortot in Paris, which is a very, very small location. And I also did, what did I do? The Adagietto for 12 strings, and another version for piano, violin, and violoncello alone.
Of course, I mean, what we haven't discussed today, because there's no time, is that there's, of course, an enormous historical precedent, especially for Mahler arrangements by Evan Stein and the Schoenberg Circle, who was doing all they could to get to know the Mahler symphonies as intimately as they could with the forces available to them. It was a similar, I suppose, situation. So this does go back a long way. I don't want to say that this is a new invention. But there's a very interesting development, because you two gentlemen, some of your arrangements are going into publication with Universal Edition, Mahler's home publishing house, so to speak. So first of all, congratulations. What is being planned right now with your arrangements and with Universal? John?
I guess I'm just polishing them up to make them presentable for publication.
Which ones are they? All of them?
Number 4 at the moment. Yeah, and the others probably to follow. Yeah, it takes a lot of time, I must say. Yeah.
Benjamin?
Yes, for me, we are talking about with Universal Edition, and for now, they want to publish the whole work I did already. Mm-hmm. And for me, of course, the project is to having the full cycle of this symphony, maybe in 10 years, or I don't know, but that's my life purpose, And I think that's a step, one more step in the way to share Mahler, because when you are a young conductor or a young arranger, you have to make your own place and your own image of yourself and of your work, and to be selected by a big edition house like this is very, very important. Is very, very warmly rewarded for your work, and of course it has to motivate you to go through next step.
It's a labor of love, I must say.
Yeah, you don't have to reveal any of the financial sides here, but I'm sure that it is a labor of love primarily. What do you think it says about the publishing industry today and about the classical music industry? This is, I mean, you have to go back quite a ways, I think, to find this kind of interest. Where are we now in the business?
Yeah, the market for it, clearly. You know, and Universal is publishing quite a lot of arrangements of the same symphonies by different people, you know, for slightly different orchestrations and so on. I mean, there's always been a market for kind of, maybe you wouldn't quite call this home performance, but, you know, smaller scale performance of bigger works, the piano trios of Beethoven symphonies. Brahms published all his symphonies in four hands arrangements, two piano arrangements. I guess it's just that the level of playing is now at such a high level that small ensembles, even amateur ensembles, can take on these pieces. So there's market for it.
And maybe
I think too that
yeah.
We also are just 2 years before COVID, and even for big orchestral structure around the world, the transcription has taken another place and another importance, because during decades it was like, you know, some bonus in their season, and now they really are considering what is the power of the transcription, and the power of the transcription is to bring the music outside the concert house, and that's I think that's the next step or business evolution.
Mm-hmm.
One of
that's a very good point about COVID, but also it may be saying something about a demand for Mahler, that, you know, that there's a type of need. There must be. I mean, business thinks very practically about these things.
Right, because in fact the Schoenberg arrangements were probably as a result of a lack of public desire for Mahler, hence they couldn't go and hear public performances, so they did it in their living room because they wanted to engage with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
all
between
right.
not listen Mahler or listen Mahler arranged, I choose the second option.
Better than not hearing it at all. Exactly. All right, so there are many questions. Thank you to our audience. I'm going to try to get through them. John Van de Vert writes, a preliminary question I have is texture. Because you have reduced forces, how do you maintain the necessary contrasts in textural density and dynamic contrast? I think we've handled that a little bit. Does anyone want to take a short version of an answer?
Yeah, I think it's what I was saying about discipline. You know, it's so when you've only got 20 players and you're trying to recreate 100, it's so tempting to use them all the whole time. But I think you've got to be super disciplined to. I like the challenge of seeing how few instruments I can use in order that when you use the whole lot, it has the necessary impact.
Mm-hmm. And even if you have the instruments there, not to use them necessarily, because you're dealing with a different textural contrast palette. you can't reach for the same depth. Yeah. All right, I have a question from Nick Fisher. I recently had the pleasure of listening to a piano description of the Cook performing version of Mahler's 10th, transcribed and performed by Christopher White. Given the lack of orchestration and development for large sections of the original work, could the piano transcription be considered the closest performable version as Mahler left it after his death? There's a nice provocative question.
That is a provocative question.
Maybe it's a statement more than a question. Anyone want to take a position on that?
I think I would hide behind Jerry Cooks himself. I think I remember that for the premiere of this orchestration of the 10th Symphony, he said that it is not Mahler's 10th, is one possible version of Mahler 10th. And I think it's the best answer we could give to this person, because orchestra or piano, Mahler didn't finish it. So yes, that's the gesture. The gesture is to try and to imagine one possible version to this masterpiece.
Mm-hmm. Which, of course, is what it begs us to do. But if you get as bare bones as possible, that's what we're left with. And I think that kind of takes us off target a little bit. I have another comment. This is more a comment from this is another comment. Vala, the composer. I love whatever modifications composers and conductors attempt in good faith with great works. Thank goodness music is not brain surgery. No one will get hurt. Okay. I have someone greeting me from Japan, XO Night. Hello from Japan. I have noticed that the motif from the very end of Das Lied von der Erde, the ewig falling two-note motive, also appears in the Fourth Symphony slow movement. It appears in many more places than that, but yes. I wanted to ask if the musicologists have discussed this motive. I don't know if this is the right time to handle this question. I'm reading this straight off my phone, so I'm not able to edit along the way. That two-note motive, of course, is in many places. It comes back in the Ninth Symphony, the opening of the Ninth Symphony. It's also in the Mitternachtslied of the Third Symphony, O Mensch, gib acht. And we could guess. It's been noticed. It's been noticed, and it is in many places. And yes, you're onto something important, because I do believe that there is signification there. But then the waters get muddy, don't they?
Some things just clearly meant a lot to Mahler, and it's like he had a very strong musical accent, and often the same thing was expressed with the same little motif.
It would make for a wonderful Mahler hour to run down some of these motives, or should I say, yes, start running them down, because there are many, and some seem to be begging for an explanation, or at least a comment. So thank you for that observation. They have been noticed, and we haven't talked about them yet, so maybe that we'll do so in the future. Pedro Arozomena, I'm sorry for your Arozomena Kagigai, I'm probably mispronouncing that. Hi from Madrid, congratulations. All the excerpts have been enlightening to listen to. Would any of you consider departing even further and investigate new forms, new music? In other words, I'm assuming reducing new music as well. I guess that's what this means.
Well, you run into more copyright issues there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, but that said, contemporary composers do make arrangements of their own music quite frequently, but for not in a shallow way, for commercial reasons, so that it gets played. More often. Very often there are two versions of these things. Yeah.
Exactly.
And of course, for the most part, they're capable of creating their own arrangements. If they're, if copyright is an issue, they can step in front of that. I have another one from another comment. XO Night from Japan says, I'm sorry, I believe I strayed off topic. I would like to ask whether you know if Urlicht was composed as the piano arrangement first or the orchestra version first. Well, it was written as a piano version first, but very suspiciously around the time of composing the Second Symphony. So it is chronologically significant that we're talking about almost exactly the same time as the Antonius von Padua Fischpredigt, which also ends up in non-vocal form in the Second Symphony, which began as a piano song as well. John van der Weert also writes, do these smaller ensembles make singing Mahler more attainable for singers of different voice ranges, which was prompted by the video example?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it means you can do it with lighter voices, younger voices.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, I have more comments here, and I'm going to have to shut this down pretty soon. We're 10 minutes over. How do the Anthony Rahman asks, how do the acoustics of the hall affect your choice of scoring? Is a smaller size hall preferable for versatility? We did kind of go into that a little bit. Benjamin, you were mentioning this a little bit, didn't you?
Yes, exactly. Could you repeat just the end of the question, please, Morten? Well,
does the smaller hall allow for more versatility? In other words, this is an asset for you having a smaller hall.
Yes,
apparently.
Yes, it's just that in the smaller hall you can, Mahler is also doing architecture with this orchestra, and if you are sitting just behind the French horn section, you don't hear the same symphony as if you are just near the concertmeister, for example. And this perspective is totally different with chamber orchestra, because you have much more contact with every and each musician on stage. And that's why maybe with the smaller force, you can miss maybe something huge in the original version, but you always, if you miss something, you get something new in the other sense.
The trade-off, yeah. Anthony Rahman continues, have you discussed the merits of arrangements with other composers? I'm not quite sure, such as Klaus
You mean
Simon.
arranging other composers?
Yes,
Right.
arranging, Klaus Simon arranging Mahler's Fifth Symphony for chamber ensemble.
As in, have we talked to other arrangers about how they go about it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a different topic in a way. But no, I guess we haven't discussed that, have we?
The big problem I must say I have with some of those older ones is the harmonium. Maybe it just we have rubbish harmoniums in this country, I don't know, but to me it never really fits into the ensemble in a convincing way. It doesn't have a kind of valid artistic voice. It's just a bit like I was saying with the danger of the piano earlier. It can just be an easy fix when there's a more artistic fix to be had.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, completely. The harmonium sound is a big problem for me. Of course, there are works such as Herzgewächse by Schoenberg, written for harmonium and lyric soprano, which are masterpieces. I mean, that is a sonority that will work if it's conceived as such, I think, and not as sort of a patchwork solution, as you say. All right, let's see. I think I have one more. Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to stop there. I thank everyone for their comments and for their opinions. That's absolutely fine. The Mahler Hour, brought to you by Mahler Foundation and contributors around the world, is a monthly streaming event bringing together individuals interested in the composer, the thinker, the humanist Gustav Mahler, as we explore not only his life and works, but also how his legacy still informs essential aspects of the human experience and how we can turn that experience into a force for the good in today's world. Become a member and support our activities. I want to thank our guests, Benjamin Garcia and John Warner, as well as our fabulous one-person production team, Marco Ayala, our community manager, and Monica Anguiano, our executive director for administration. The next edition of the Mahler Hour will be airing on the 11th of March, when we take a look at the songs of Alma Mahler. My guests will be soprano Elisa Koloverts and pianist Marianna Sherinian, as they discuss their upcoming release of The Complete Leader. That's our program for today. Stay safe.